tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnā tātou kua rau I ka mai te whare nei. I mua I tō tātou tīmatahana me ino I tātou. Tuku a te wairua kia rere ki nā taumata. Hei arahi I a tātou mahi tēnei ahi pō. Me tā tātou whai I nā tikana a rātou mā. Kia mau, kia ita, kia kore ai e naro. Tūturu o whiti kia whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi e hui e, tāi ki e.
Tēnā koe, Haniko, for opening our event this evening. Haniko Te Kurapa is manager of Creative New Zealand's organisational cultural program, Te Kaupapa o Toi Aotearoa. I'd also like to introduce and thank our sign language interpreters, Kelly and Megan, who will be on our screens tonight. This is the 2022 Prime Minister's Awards for Literary Achievement. I'm Nick Bollinger and I'll be your host for this evening's online panel. First, I'd like to offer my congratulations to the three writers who are being honoured in these awards: Stephanie Johnson, James Norcliffe, and Vincent O'Malley. Three very different kinds of writers working in quite different spheres of literature. Yet, to speak from personal experience, each of them in their own way, through their perceptions and precision as professional makers of written language, has helped me to think about and see in a different light aspects of this place where we live, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And in saying that, I know I'm speaking for many other people too. So congratulations to all three of you and welcome. It's so great to see the importance of literature and the excellence of your work in particular being celebrated in this way. I'd also like to welcome everyone who's watching this evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. This event initially went online in 2021 during the pandemic and continued in this format with last year's event. And while there's undeniably something nice about being physically together with people in the same room, it's actually turned out that in doing this online, more people have been able to participate. So if you're watching with us, wherever you are, if you have any questions, feel free to write these in the comments thread at any time, because we're going to allow time for the writers to answer your questions towards the end of the session. Now, the Prime Minister's Awards for Literary Achievement recognise notable literary achievement by New Zealand writers who've made a significant contribution to New Zealand literature in the genres of nonfiction, fiction, and poetry. The winner of each category receives $60,000. The awards were introduced in 2003, and in that inaugural year were presented to Michael King, Janet Frame, and Honi Tufari. It's 20 years ago this year, and since then, 60 of our most treasured and accomplished writers have been recognised with this prestigious acknowledgement. Now, when I first accepted the role of chair for tonight's event, I thought that at this point in the proceedings, I'd be introducing Jacinda Ardern. Obviously, that all changed a couple of weeks ago, and I'd now be introducing the current Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins. What I didn't expect was that I'd in fact be standing in for Chris Hipkins, as he's unfortunately unable to join us online this evening, but he has sent the following message, which I'll now read. If I can find it. There we go. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm pleased to offer my warmest congratulations to James Norcliffe, Stephanie Johnson, and Vincent O'Malley, the winners of the 2022 Prime Minister's Awards for Literary Achievement. I'm sorry I'm not able to join you tonight to celebrate, but I hope everyone enjoys this online panel kōrero and hearing the work of these wonderful writers. Congratulations to you all once again. Ngā mihi nui. Tēnā koe, Prime Minister. And now we have a message of congratulations from Chair of the Arts Council, Karen Rangi.
Kia ora ana koutou katoa toa, tēnā tātou katoa, and welcome to everybody joining us online tonight for this very special event. I'm delighted to be here with you, to celebrate this wonderful group of writers this evening. To James, Stephanie and Vincent, on behalf of the Arts Council of New Zealand, Toi Aroa, I'm thrilled to offer my congratulations to you as the recipients of the 2022 Prime Minister's Awards for Literary Achievement. A big thank you to Nick Bollinger for facilitating tonight's event, and also to our wonderful signers from Platform Interpreting New Zealand for your support to this event too. And I also wanted to thank our co-hosts, Auckland Live and The Big Idea. The Prime Minister's Awards for Literary Achievement are significant awards, not just for the recipients, but for the literary community as a whole. They're a wonderful recognition of lifetimes of hard work and dedication to the written word. It's so important that we take the time to acknowledge and to thank those of you who are honoured here tonight, who've continued to hone their craft and who've inspired so many readers and encouraged the journeys of so many other writers. Part of the beauty of having this event online is that we can reach many more people all around the country. Viewers also have the opportunity to participate in tonight's event. So, if you have any questions you'd like to ask our writers, please write them in the chat box, whether you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, and there'll be time at the end to answer your questions. I'm really looking forward to hearing James, Vincent and Stephanie read tonight and to the discussions that follow. So once again, a huge congratulations to all of you on this wonderful achievement. And now I'll pass you back over to Nick.
Tēnā koe, Karen. And again, congratulations to you, James, Vincent and Stephanie. Now, there's something I'm curious about, which I'd like to ask each of you in turn, as I imagine you might have quite different answers. I'm wondering what receiving this award means to you, but also how will winning this award affect your work as a writer? Will it make it easier, perhaps, to prioritise or complete a project that was previously on the back burner? Does it buy you some time? Will you paint the house? Will it just be carrying on with whatever your current project is? James, could I start with you?
Well, it's actually utterly wonderful to be given this award. I better get that out of the way first. I'm not sure it will affect my work greatly. It will help us get off to the UK to see our little grandsons, which is something we like to do and haven't been able to do lately for quite a while. You mentioned time. Well, I don't have a day job anymore, so I shouldn't really say it will give me time. My main problem with time is procrastination. And all of the displacement activities, all the internet and the books and the walks and the crosswords, the cryptic crosswords, and saying yes to all manner of people who ask me to do things. Perhaps it might give me a bit more authority to say no. I guess it will be a boost in confidence, and it will increase my faith in myself. Like a lot of writers, I worry about the worth of what I do and my ability, and this will help me persuade myself that what I do has value. So perhaps it will affect my work. I hope so.
Thank you, James. Vincent, how about you?
Well, of course, it's a huge honour to receive this award, particularly when you look at the incredible previous recipients of it. So, I'm humbled by that. In practical terms, I had a book I'd been trying to get underway since about 2017 and struggling to get funding, wondering if I'd ever get that project off the ground or just ditch it altogether. And when I got news of the PM's award, that solved that problem for me. I opened up a file and started writing, and actually just this week I finished the first draft of it. It's quite a short book, so that that's great. That's a book that wouldn't have probably existed without the Prime Minister's Award.
Fantastic. That's such an immediate, practical result. Stephanie, what about you?
Oh, I still am on cloud nine. I couldn't believe it. And in fact, when Malcolm from CNZ rang to tell me that I'd got it, I didn't really understand what he was saying. It took a while for it to sink in. And similar to Vincent, I had started writing a historical novel set in 1951 and hadn't got any funding for it. So, you know, that it just gave me this great impetus to go on. I mean, I can't stress how much of a difference it's made to my sort of sense of self-esteem as a writer. I know it's silly, these things shouldn't matter so much, but they do, especially at our stage of life.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm going to now ask each of the three writers to read something from their work. And after each reading, I've got a couple of questions I'm going to ask. And as we've been reminding you at pretty regular intervals, if you've got any questions, anyone out there who's watching, I invite you to just post these in the comments thread, and I'll get an opportunity to ask these later in our event. This year's Prime Minister's Award for Literary Achievement in Poetry is awarded to James Norcliffe. Now, James is a poet, fiction writer and educator from Otatahi, Christchurch. He's published 11 collections of poetry, a short story collection, a novel, and several award-winning novels for young people. He's also edited several anthologies of poetry and writing by young people, as well as co-edited the major anthologies Essential New Zealand Poems, Facing the Empty Page, published in 2014, Leaving the Red Zone, Poems from the Canterbury Earthquakes in 2016, and Ko Aotearoa Tātou, We Are New Zealand in 2020. James has won a number of awards for both his poetry and prose. With Bernadette Hall, he was presented with a Press Literary Liaisons Honour Award for a lasting contribution to literature in the South Island. And in 2012, he was awarded the Lincoln University Medal. His writing fellowships include the Burns Fellowship, the International Writers Program Iowa Residency, and residencies at Massey University, Otago University College of Education, and in Hobart. His work is published in journals worldwide and has been translated into several languages. In 2018, he was the Creative New Zealand Randall Cottage Writer in Residence. I'm now going to ask James to read two poems.
Tēnā koe, Nick. I'd like to read two poems from my new book. It's so new it hasn't even been released yet. It's coming out in a couple of weeks in the launch at Christchurch. It's called Letter to Umuamua, and I'll hold it up. It is addressed to Umuamua, and just to perhaps explain that, Umuamua, you might remember in 2018 or so, was an interstellar object that sailed into our orbit somehow. First, they thought it was a comet, then an asteroid, but because of the nature of its flight, it has been suggested that it could have been actually a visitor from another civilization. That's what I like to think anyway. So I thought it was a good thing to write a letter to Umuamua, and here it is. Letter to Umuamua. Oh, by the way, I have checked the pronunciation. I had a flush of horror that it might have been pronounced Umwamwa or something, but I have checked it, so it is Umuamua. Dear Umuamua, this morning I saw a willow tree in first spring, flush of green in a paddock full of black sleeping steers. It was a prayer in the still air, morning sun and the sea beyond. Nothing to make the new leaves quiver except celebration. I know you didn't hang around, dear Umuamua. One brief look was all it took before you hoisted your great light sail and hightailed it out of here. I understand your misgivings, Umuamua. I have them too. But it's, well, not all bad, really. A kind farmer allowed this willow to live, give shelter to his cattle as they wait for the abattoir. That has to be worth something, doesn't it? And from this distance, the sea is blue and apparently cold, the hills almost green, the cattle innocent and the willows celebrating. I'm not saying come back, dear Umurmur. We do know what we're doing. We're not all bad. We just can't help ourselves. And the second poem is called Living in the Goldilocks Zone. We used to enjoy living here. There were quince trees and apricot trees blossoming in our garden. Life was nice. The lawns were neatly trimmed and the edges contained. In the distance was a pleasant view of a well-behaved ocean. Of course, there was that ramshackle batch deep in the woods where the bears lived. But it was easy to avoid. We just didn't go there, preferring our raised beds and the exemplary manners of beans, carrots, and broccoli. Life, as I said, was nice. We lived within careful parameters and had circumscribed extremes. We used to enjoy living here on our pretty little planet. Porridge was always provided at a designated time. But now the lawns are brown, as dry and crunchy underfoot as cornflakes. The carrots droop and shrivel, and all the bowls, little, middle-sized, and extra large, are much, much too hot to touch, and every bear is angry.
Thank you, James. It's wonderful to get a preview of the new book, and I'm so looking forward to it. I was going to ask you, this award is specifically for your work as a poet, but as I said earlier, I mean, you've written novels, short fiction, and in fact, your fiction in particular has had you labelled often as a young adults or children's writer. But it strikes me that the beauty of poems such as the ones you've just read is that they could connect just as powerfully to any reader, young or old. I'm just wondering whether that distinction between writing for adults and children is one that concerns you at all when you're writing, or whether it's something that's just imposed on you, perhaps for the convenience of others.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two parts there. There's the accessibility factor, and then there's the audience factor. It's axiomatic, really. You should write for, your writing should be crafted for a given audience and have that audience's needs in mind. And I've noted this even with writing to children. Some of my books are aimed at 6, 7, 8-year-olds, and some at the lower high school level. But it's true too that what's aimed at adults can also be accessible to children at times, and what's written for kids can be fun for adults. I mean, I think of a book like Alice in Wonderland, which is, it's a book I return to just about every year, and it's treasured by adults probably more than children. I take a lot of writing classes for young people, and I usually tell them that I wear 4 writing hats: poetry, novels for young people, fiction, and editing. And sometimes I draw stylized top hats on the whiteboard to illustrate this. And being an old teacher, I don't do anything. I just leave them there for a moment for the suspense. And while we're waiting, one kid once asked me, "Why have you drawn 4 tombstones on the whiteboard?" And I said, "They're not tombstones, they're hats." And but I'm just worried sometimes whether that kid was actually a prophet rather than a little kid. To return to the question, though, I do like my poems to be accessible to a wide audience. There are some helpers I have here. I also like them to be fun at times too, so some of my poems are actually quite funny. One of the helpers is a critique group. I belong to a critique group, and we share work and discuss it, sometimes quite savagely we discuss it. And this tends to iron out any obscurities and pretension, because I do also road test a lot of poems in front of live audiences. We have regular readings in Christchurch, and so clarity and I guess wit too is important. There's a danger here, though, between devaluing the currency by playing for laughs and audience approval. You can. I like the poems to look good on the page as well. I think reading aloud also helps develop the music in the poem, the rhythm and the cadence. And just to make the point finally, a few years ago, Clear Story Press, which is run by Dr. Glenn Strange at the Christchurch School for Young Writers then, we gathered together a collection of my poems for specifically aimed at school kids, and some of them were aimed particularly at children, specifically written for children, but a large number we gathered from my published work for grown-ups and poems that would work well with kids. And we found they did. You know, they were written for adults, but a lot of the kids found pleasure in them and something to get out of them. And accessible poems, as with Alice in Wonderland I just mentioned, can often be layered, often simple on the surface, but with depths. There can, of course, be complexity and apparent simplicity. William Blake, think Emily Dickinson, or Basho, if it comes to that, you know, the Japanese haiku man. That'll do.
One thing all three of this year's honorees have in common is that you all address things that are relevant to conversations that are going on in our society right now. I was just wondering how consciously you draw on those conversations in your writing. I was thinking, you know, the two poems you just read being possible examples.
Yeah, I do. I'm a news junkie. Quite a few poets are, actually, I've found out over the time. And I do spend a lot of time before breakfast reading a whole range of news outlets and blogs on my computer. I just love the babble of it all, you know, and the Tower of Babel sense of all these voices. And I'm quite obsessive about following these. And because I get up at 6 and I don't breakfast till 9, it's a lot of that. It's another one of those displacement activities, I guess. But what I like about them, well, I'm fascinated by them. It's like watching an ongoing train crash, you know, looking aghast at what humans are doing to themselves and the planet. Just enormity after enormity. For example, I haven't been able to let go of Donald Trump for years. Endlessly ghastly and endlessly compelling. I don't really do social media, though. I do have a Facebook membership and Twitter. Years ago, a publisher said, I've got to get onto Facebook and I've got to get onto Twitter because that's the only way I'm going to sell truckloads of books. But I'm not aware I ever sold a book through Twitter, mainly because I don't actually do it. I just have a membership and I don't follow people. So I don't see those conversations. I do cut and paste a lot of URLs from some of these awful articles and I send them on to friends and fellow writers who do the same for me. Does this inform my work? Of course it does, but I hope in a subtle and not a soapbox way. I don't want to preach to anybody. And as you saw, putting my new book together, I was quite surprised at how often I return to environmental issues and what's happening in the two poems I read, as you mentioned.
Yes.
But the overall, there's a sort of melancholy too, and I think it's a melancholy given how old I am now and what's happening, sort of an elegiac tone, I think, about where we are right now as we rocket towards whatever. I was asked the other day whether the poems would have been the same or similar if I'd been writing them as a young poet. And I said, well, these poems are elegiac, but if I'd written them all those years ago, they probably would have been angry. Yeah. So more power to Greta Thunberg's arm. I like that. I think, you know, the the old fairy story, or the Hans Andersen story of the emperor in clothes. And I think Greta Thunberg is that person standing there shouting that you haven't got any clothes on, but I don't think the emperor's listening yet.
Look, that's a fantastic answer, and it's a huge question in a way, and I think it's one that we're probably going to return to in our conversation as it continues this evening. I will remind people who are listening to fire any questions or anything they think I ought to be asking into that comments box. I'd now like to introduce the recipient of this year's Prime Minister's Award for Literary Achievement in Nonfiction, Vincent O'Malley. Vincent O'Malley is based in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington. He's a founding partner of History Works, a group of historians specialising in Treaty of Waitangi research. He's the author of a number of books on New Zealand history, including The Meeting Place, Maori and Pākehā Encounters 1642 to 1840, which was shortlisted for the New Zealand Post Book Awards in 2013, and Beyond the Imperial Frontier, the Contest for Colonial New Zealand in 2014. Dr. O'Malley's landmark book on the Waikato War, The Great War for New Zealand, Waikato 1800 to 2000, was published in 2016. This remarkable best-selling history focuses on the human impact of the war in the Waikato, its origins and aftermath. It was followed in 2019 by the New Zealand Wars, Ngā Pakanga o Aotearoa, that provides a highly accessible introduction to the causes, events and consequences of the New Zealand Wars. Last year, Vincent's book, Voices from the New Zealand Wars, He Reo no Ngā Pakanga o Aotearoa, won the 2022 Auckland New Zealand Book Awards for Nonfiction. He's currently co-principal investigator on a 3-year study into how the 19th century New Zealand wars have helped shape memory, identity, and history. Vincent, I'd like to ask you to read for us.
Thanks, Nick. Tēnā koutou katoa. This is an extract from Voices from the New Zealand Wars. The New Zealand Wars were a prolonged and complex series of conflicts that changed forever the course of New Zealand history. They were transformative events in our national story, in many ways far more so than the 2 world wars that generations of school children learned about instead. Fought between the Crown and different groups of Māori, the wars are usually said to have begun at the Bay of Islands in March 1845, though a case is sometimes made for an earlier start at Waitangi in the northern South Island in June 1843. By the time they came to an end in 1872, around 6,000 people had been killed or wounded, over 2/3 of them Māori. The country had changed immensely as a result of these conflicts. So what were they and what were they about? Well, that's been debated and discussed by historians for years. It's important to remember that they were quite discrete episodes spanning many years and often driven by local factors. Bungled New Zealand Company land dealings were behind the Wellington conflicts of 1846, for example, but irrelevant to the Northern War that ended that same year. Yet for all the regional nuances and variations, certain recurring motifs can be identified. Land sovereignty and latent Victorian assumptions of racial dominance were all issues in these conflicts. An overarching theme was the tension between increasing Crown assertions of absolute sovereignty and Māori expectations of continuing chiefly authority. At their core, many of these conflicts raised the same question: whose will was going to prevail? This was more than just a question of land ownership. It went to the heart of how Māori and Pākehā would live together in this country. Would Māori share the fate of many other Indigenous peoples around the globe, being reduced to a state of subservience and perhaps even facing the prospect of total extinction? Or was New Zealand somehow different? Would the promises held out in the Treaty of Waitangi be upheld by the Crown? We not only know the answer to that question, we live with the consequences in so many ways today. The later history of New Zealand was profoundly shaped by these conflicts. The Native Land Court would not have been possible without the New Zealand Wars. Neither would the native school system. One stripped Māori of their lands, the other of their language. This history is not over and done with. It's the story of how we got to where we are today. alongside Māori casualty rates that in many cases eclipsed in relative terms those suffered by New Zealand troops during either World War. The New Zealand War saw entire districts confiscated from their Māori owners by the Crown, mostly under the New Zealand Settlements Act of 1863. For many Māori communities, the damage was devastating. It was not something that could be recovered from overnight and not remotely capable of being addressed through the modern-day treaty claim settlement process, given a typical package of redress involves the return of around 1 to 2% of the unimproved value of the lands confiscated. Understanding this history helps to fill in vital pieces of the puzzle when it comes to explaining the present.
Thanks, Vincent. I asked James before how much his work was inspired by current conversations that are taking place in our society. And the piece you just read, in a sense, touched on that. But I wondered if you could expand on how much your work is a response to some of those conversations, or whether you're in fact using your work to try and initiate new conversations.
I think historians are always standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of our work. We build on what's been done before, whether we're challenging that or deepening it or extending it in some ways. It's all adding to that body of knowledge. So we're never starting with an entirely blank canvas. And in that sense, it's contributed to an existing conversation. But for me also, I haven't just written books, I've also been quite vocal about particular issues that I felt strongly about. And a big one was, why aren't all children in this country learning New Zealand history at school? It just seemed astounding to me that so many children would leave school without even a basic knowledge of the history of their own country, the whenua they live on, the schools that they go to. So it was great to see that from this year that will change, and that will be transformative in the long term, I think. And of course, a lot of people were behind that. The wonderful students of Otahunga College organised a petition in 2015, signed by 13,000 people. So there, I mean, that's an example of where I was adding my voice to that call for New Zealand history to be taught, for people to engage with it, for us to understand and embrace our history, warts and all, really. And of course, Māori have been, for generations been calling for greater awareness and acknowledgement of our history. And so when I speak to these issues, I'm also kind of speaking, I'm also backing those calls from everywhere around the country.
You talked about historians, standing on the shoulders of their predecessors. And you noted in that passage that you read that historians have for years debated and discussed what the New Zealand wars were all about. Why is it that in different eras, historians will produce quite different answers?
Well, sometimes people ask me, when will the history of the New Zealand wars be done? When will it be finished? The short answer to that is never, because each generation writes its own history according to its values and priorities. And different understandings evolve over time, different priorities. And a good example of that is that 50 years ago, historians mostly wouldn't have been that interested in the role of women in the New Zealand wars. And today, that you couldn't really get away with that. That's a topic that you need to engage with. You can also see those dynamics in terms of the understandings of the New Zealand wars. Even just what they've been called, how that's changed over time reflects those different understandings. Probably 50 years ago, a lot of people would have known them as the Māori Wars, and that was consistent with the British tendency to name wars after the people they attacked and the countries they invaded, the Zulu Wars and so on. From about the 1960s, as historians became more understanding of a different viewpoint, there were calls to name these the land wars, on the basis that settler land hunger and greed was the primary cause of these conflicts. But later historians have argued that these conflicts were about more than just land, that they were really about the future of New Zealand as a whole. So 1986, James Belich wrote his book, The New Zealand Wars and the Victorian Interpretation of Racial Conflict. And that kind of revived a term that had really first been promoted by James Cowan in the 1920s, his books on the New Zealand Wars. And so I think that term is now, probably more widely used, and it speaks to the fact, I think, that these were defining conflicts in our national story. As
a historian, you obviously deal in nonfiction, but I'm wondering what part imagination plays in the work of a historian.
Yeah, I think it's important because there's sometimes a bit of an assumption that history isn't really literature as such, that it's just a kind of painting by numbers, technical exercise that anybody could do. But I think really good historians have to be storytellers, and that requires imagination. It's more art than science in that way. And one of the other things that I've become convinced of over the years is there's a real need to visit the places that you write about as well. You need to stand on that whenua. You need to, often you learn new things that you wouldn't read from written sources or documentary sources. But it's also partly about reimagining what took place at those sites and taking in everything you see, you smell, and you feel at those places. So that there's a kind of wider engagement with that, and that's a real that requires use of your imagination as well.
And that informs the way you write about history. This is something I would like to come back to with the other writers later on too, because I expect that it may be something that is done by fiction writers as well. So it's a fascinating subject. And we will come back to some of these things a little later. This year's Prime Minister's Award for Literary Achievement in Fiction is awarded to Stephanie Johnson. Stephanie's based in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Is a writer of novels, short stories, and poetry, and has written also for stage and television and radio. Her many novels include The Shag Incident, which won the Montana Deutsch Medal for Fiction in 2003, The Whistler, which was shortlisted for the 1999 Montana Book Award for Fiction, and Belief, shortlisted for the 2001 Montana Book Awards. Her most recent novel, Everything Changes, won the 2021 New Zealand Society of Authors Heritage Prize for Fiction. In 2000, she was awarded the Catherine Mansfield Fellowship in Menton, France, and in 2001 was made a literary fellow at Auckland University. Several of her novels have been longlisted for the prestigious IMPAC Awards in Dublin, and her Crimes of Neglect was shortlisted for the Wattie Book Awards in 1993. With the late Peter Wells, Stephanie founded the Auckland Writers and Readers Festival in 1998. Stephanie was the 2016 recipient of both the Randall Cottage Writer in Residence in Wellington and Alumna Merita Award, Diocesan School for Girls, Auckland.
You've done your research.
In 2019, Stephanie was appointed as a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for Services to Literature. And I'd like to ask Stephanie to read for us now.
All right. Like James, I'm going to be reading from something that hasn't been published yet. It's due out in April. It's a novel called Kind that I wrote during the lockdowns, basically. So we are with the National Party MP, backbencher MP called Lyle Hull, who was gone for a bike ride during the first lockdown in the Alps. And he's been captured by a couple of American survivalists or preppers. Okay, so this is just a little extract. The winter was deepening, the days shorter, the mornings slower to come, the temperature ever more Arctic. Each day at around 6 a.m, after he had availed himself of the facilities, Minerva would lead him through the kitchen area and up to the cave. It wasn't a fantasy, was it? But she did seem to allow the chain to slacken more. It did seem as though he had a memory, more than one, of her letting him slip behind her rather than keeping him just ahead in full view, because it was hard to walk two abreast through the colossal mess of their belongings. I don't like mess, Lyle would think. I am a tidy person. It was good to remember these things about himself, to remember who he was. I am a libertarian. I disliked obeying the lockdown. I believe in personal freedom. I believe in free speech. I believe in my right to come up into these mountains to be surrounded by beauty. I am a gentle, loving man. I have never knowingly hurt a soul. This morning, he would take a chance. Minerva, he tried after she had opened the cage and gestured for him to climb inside. I am not a bad person. Infinitesimally, she shook her head, her eyes maintaining their characteristic blankness, making him think in that instant of a constituent who would call into the electorate office far too often, an old man whose brains were fried at Lake Alice. A momentary insane fear gripped him, come from lack of sleep and a diet of oats and dandelion coffee. They were zombies, Minerva and Joyce. He was among the undead. The zombie apocalypse had come to pass. Get in the cage, said Minerva. You could learn to trust me. I won't hurt you. He could not get back in the cage. Not this morning, not ever. The zombie glared at him, narrowing her dead, pale jelly eyes. You have nothing to be frightened of. I would never hurt you. I would never hurt a woman. Besides, you're bigger than me. Your brother did, though, didn't he? Up for sexual assault. Found it online. She was snarling. It's in your blood. That was when he was still at school. Years ago. He was never convicted. He's your brother. Get in the cage. She gave the chain a fierce yank, jarring the tendons in his neck. He's not a bad man either, he muttered. Why did Bernie follow him around everywhere he went? There was no getting away from him. Get in the cage. He and I have got an initiative going, he would tell her. It would help. It could help. It could go either way. He couldn't get back in the cage. People like you, just like you, people who want to live in New Zealand, people the country needs. We are answering a mutual need, facilitative of exchange. Safety in exchange for skill, clean environment as a trade-off for developed vision, belief in the future for the planet, the climate, get in the fucking cage right now. Sharply, she hauled on the chain again, at the same time moving swiftly to the other side of his prison, as if she would topple him in head first. He fell across the cage roof, his legs coming up, feet waving, aware that she was bending over him now. His thighs were closing around Minerva's neck, and he was squeezing as hard as he could, hearing her choking, aware of her struggling to free herself, seeing her arms waving, feeling her head swivel in his grip, and the lunge of her jaw to his groin, her teeth chomping his balls, wrenching, half tearing, and he was letting her go, his torso and legs scissoring to effect brutal scraping entry into the cage, and she was puffing, red-faced, furious, slamming the lid shut on him, curled in fetal position. Asshole. She gave the cage a violent jolt, then swung away, her footsteps heavy down the stairs, leaving him paralyzed with pain and wondering, with a suddenly cold, rational part of his brain, if she had done him lasting damage. Real fear fizzed around the edges of the thought, but didn't consume him. He held it off. He strove for calm. He did not cry out. Groaning, he turned over onto his back and splayed his knees, hands cupped over his throbbing parts, and found his crotch was wet from her mauling mouth. Wild terror took him then, uncontrolled, the whirling, ludicrous insanity of his situation, the very real possibility that he would not get out of this alive. He was crying, heaving, and Puppy was coming to lie by the cage. She put her nose to the bars and licked his tears, and he found himself thinking, though he could scarcely believe he could, how much worse all this would be without her.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Sorry for lowering the time. You always count on me to do that.
This novel, I've actually had the privilege of reading an advanced copy of it. So I'm not going to give away any spoilers to anyone who's listening, but I do want to ask you some questions about it, because you talked about it being written during the lockdowns and obviously set against that backdrop. And I'm just wondering, because I think this is opens out into a more general question about where books come from, where stories come from. I was wondering, would the characters in this book ever have even existed if the pandemic hadn't occurred? Did they appear to you out of this particular situation, or were they people that were somehow that you wanted to write about anyway, and this maybe the situation gave you the setting for their actions?
It was such a strange time, wasn't it, the lockdowns, because you sort of felt very anxious and nervous a lot of the time about what was going on, but at the same time, most of us were so bored. And I was sort of teaching online through it, which was kind of exhausting. Some people you might remember there was an MP who went for a bike ride and got into a bit of trouble, but he was a Labour MP, but I've turned him into a National Party MP, and of course what happens to him is far worse than what happened. And I think that through the lockdowns and through the pandemic, we were getting a lot of kind of stuff through social media and mainstream media about how New Zealand was regarded as a safe haven. So that aspect of the novel, with that the wealthy people making their way in here, and also the fact that we have these preppers, these American preppers living in places like the Southern Alps. There were jokes through the through the COVID of Americans coming here and having their own private armies and things like that. So it was very, very rich territory. And also, I'd had this idea in the back of my mind for quite a long time about writing a novel about a female fraudster. So, Jolene, who's one of the major characters of the book, is what happens to her is sort of loosely based on a very famous case in Australia where a female television executive did pretty much what Jolene does. And in fact, when I was reading about female crime, it is something we're very good at, fraud. Contumacious disobedience, winning the faith of it happens such a lot where women, in certain situations, they're trusted with the accounts, but they're bleeding them dry on the sly.
So she might have turned up in another novel had the pandemic never occurred.
Yeah, I think she would have, absolutely, yeah.
Because I was wondering whether, your writing is often topical. I was wondering whether things come up that sort of push other ideas aside.
It depends how long I've been thinking about a book. My one big non-fiction, West Island, which is about 5 20th century New Zealanders who became household names in Australia, I'd been thinking about that book for a long time, and it took a very long time to write. In between writing fiction. So I think, and my historical novels too, they're not topical generally. They will often have a sort of feminist kind of slant to them, or I'm exploring some sort of aspect of 19th century or 20th century New Zealand society. So that's not necessarily topical.
Yeah, I was going to ask you almost the reverse of the question I asked Vincent about imagination, and that fiction writers are, by definition, they're allowed to make stuff up. But what are the limits, or do you impose limits on yourself? Does your writing, particularly if you're writing a historical work, a historical novel, does it require you, is there some responsibility that goes with that, or?
I think there is an. I'm always very careful to not shift things about. History has to be seen as this kind of scaffold that you're hanging your story on. A novel of mine, The Whistler, which is about a dog he's a lap dog who's lived on the laps of various women through history, and one of his owners is Hine Te Aparangi, who was Kupe's wife. And so I have him coming out to Aotearoa from Hawaii, and of course she followed Kupe out, she came later, and I made it all up. Of course I made it all up, and but I did get a couple of letters, and they were pre-email from scholars saying, how did I know about this? So, and also I was very fascinated, when Kate Grenville in Australia published The Secret River. A lot of Australian historians got really pissed off because people were reading that novel as if it was history, and historical novels are not history. I think it's, if you read a historical novel and you're really fascinated by that period, then go and read some actual history, Like, look at the huge success of the Vikings series, television series, So much of that is utter bullshit, especially the way that they allow women to be so good at being warriors. And we weren't. We were perpetually pregnant and sick. That's the truth.
Hey, look, I've got more questions here, but I would like to remind people I've got some questions that have already come in, and I will come to those in a minute. But if people have others, please feel free to pass them on to us now. But I have got one more question I'd like to actually ask all three of you. Writing's, I think, particularly thought of as a solitary and rather lonely occupation. But it occurred to me, thinking about the three of you and your work, that it's actually, in all of your cases, it's brought a lot of interaction with other people, a lot of collaboration. James, through your teaching and editing. Vincent, whose recent projects have been in collaboration with Joanna Kidman, the sociologist, and Stephanie, through your involvement really with the whole writing community through such events as the Auckland Writers Festival. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering how you all see it. I mean, am I right in assuming that writing, at least for the three of you, has to some extent been a kind of community building exercise? Any of you can go first. Stephanie.
It's a balance, isn't it? Because you do have to have that solitude, the sort of notion of the poet writing in a cafe. I mean, I've never been able to do that. I have to be on my own to do it. But it is lovely having that collegial sense, when you have, my friendship with Peter Wells was one of the most important friendships in my life because of that shared territory.
James?
Teaching too, when you're teaching, you, as James would know and Vincent would certainly, that's a communal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Writing is by definition solitary. I'm with Stephanie. I can't write in public. Got to be in my little hermetic cell. But that doesn't mean that writers are solitaries. I mean, it's great to break out of that room and mix and mingle, particularly with, I find anyway, with fellow writers. We've got a lot in common, we share. Christchurch has got a lovely writing community. It always has, very supportive, and it brings writers together, and that mutual support is so very important. So building community, yes, I saw this really when we did the book you mentioned, Leaving the Red Zone, which was a poetry sort of response to the dreadful series of Canterbury earthquakes. Joanna Preston, I'd been poetry editor of the press, and we're getting a lot of poems about earthquakes, and while some of them weren't too crash hot, more feeling than craft, there were some really good ones, and Jo Preston had found the same with the group she was moving with, so we thought it would be a good idea to gather as many of these as we could and publish them in a book. And it all poured out, all this wonderful stuff. Some of it was tragic, some of it was funny, some of it was philosophical. But in the end, we ended up with nearly 100 poems from more than 100 poems, but from nearly 100 writers, from a lot of people who had never written poetry before. And when we had the launch, it was a huge launch at a brew pub, which was in Lincoln and had been built completely out of recycled earthquake debris. So there was a wonderful look. But the community feeling there, and the fact that this poetry had brought all these people together, and we thought, well, we have a document now. You can have all the scientific analysis and the political analysis of the earthquake, but we had an analysis from the heart of the people, and that was so important.
Vincent, does writing necessarily make you part of a community?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've just ticked over 30 years now working with and for iwi in the treaty claims process, so that there's a strong collaborative element to that. But one of the things about that is that research is often, iwi and treaty lawyers and a small handful of others are kind of aware of that. So what I'm trying to do with my published work is share that rich body of knowledge with a much wider community. Because as a nation, we kind of need to know that history. And so for me, that's a really big exercise in community building is getting out there in the community and schools and, up and down the literary festivals, whatever, academic conferences, whatever it takes to go out and have those conversations with people about why they should care about our history, why it matters that we engage with it. In terms of the writing process, of course, you're right that can be a very solitary thing. The work with Joanna and the rest of our Marsden Fund team on the Difficult Histories project has been really amazing, because what I've learned from that is, you can be part of something that's bigger than the sum of its parts, and we kind of learn from each other and we feed off one another and spark ideas. So that's been really wonderful.
And that informs the writing that's going to come out of the thing in the end. And the books you've written also, in a way, they're the thing that opens the door to a community, they're the starting point for going in.
That gets me in the door, yeah. And then we have those conversations.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm going to have a look at the questions that have that we've been given here that have come in so far. Some of these are for specific people. I seem to have, here it is. Sorry, I'm having my own little technical problems here. Here we go. Someone wants to know, Stephanie, your writing spans a range of genres. Do you have a favourite?
Not really, no. I do like writing what seems to be labeled satire. I'm not sure whether it actually is a lot of the time. I mean, it's certainly comedic, but satire is so specific. My publishers, the novel that I read from before, see, this is the cover here, and it says here, a satirical novel of lockdown survivalists and being kind, and it is. But often I don't even realize I'm writing satire. Actually, I just think it's funny.
Just what you want to write.
Yeah, well, I think the whole. I mean, I read a very gothic bit of it, but it is funny, mostly. I mean, we have had this, haven't we, in New Zealand for years now? This idea that New Zealanders write very gloomy stuff. But I think that's changing. I'm one of the fiction judges for the Ockhams this year, and there's been a lot of incredibly kind of vibrant and lively stuff coming through that isn't melancholic.
Thanks, Stephanie. A question has come in from Becky on Facebook for James. Loved your new poems. When did you know you were a poet?
Oh, I don't know. I do tell this story quite often. I was born on the west coast of the South Island, Greymouth, but I had a lot of relatives up in Westport and the Buller region, there, in a place called Waitangi, actually, just north of Westport. And I used to spend a lot of time with my Auntie Abby, my widowed Auntie Abby there. lots and lots of cousins. I was related to just about half the village. And I can remember one day when I was on the back lawn, and a generation, so I was about 7 or 8, and a whole lot of other, no, 5 or 6, I think. And cousins about 10 years old, three cousins were doing headstands and listening to Elvis Presley and that sort of thing. And one of them asked me the question, "What are you going to be when you grow up, Jimmy?" And instead of saying a crane driver or a coal miner like some of my uncles, I said a poet, but I actually didn't know how it was pronounced, and I said poot. And they laughed, but I often say they laughed at the pronunciation, but not the ambition. And I think I must have known some years before that I always wanted to be a poet. I was quite good at writing and loved writing from a very early age.
Becky also wants to know, how do you go about sharing your work more widely?
Sharing
your work. I suppose she may also mean, how does one go about sharing one's work more widely?
I see. Well, I mentioned the importance of reading aloud, and in Christchurch we have an organisation that's been going for 30 years called the Canterbury Poets Collective. And that stages each year a season of public poetry readings where I have 3 featured poets, always one from outside Christchurch, and a couple of local poets featured, and then BYO poetry. And over the years, it's been wonderful to see people come up and for the very first time, very nervously, read without much confidence, and then gradually grow in confidence, and eventually many of them in fact, have come through to publish books. So I think it's that way. Be brave enough to get your poems out there. Publication and print is, I guess it's easy now with the internet, but that's often not very satisfactory, because anybody can publish on the internet, and you really want to push it through gatekeepers of some sort. But keep trying. That's the only thing I could say.
But, and join your local, wherever you are, join your local poets collective.
Absolutely.
A question for Vincent. What is your hope for the future of Aotearoa's understanding of the past? And there's a second part to this, which is what can be done to help us develop a shared understanding of our history? I think you did partly address these, but
I'll have to give the TV version for that, because otherwise I could talk for the next hour on it. But I think my hope for the future is that future generations are historically literate and aware. They have a sense of the whenua they live on, their community. They have that engagement. They're curious about those communities, and they don't live with the kind of historical amnesia that a lot of people had, because we know that large numbers of people who went through school didn't really have any exposure to New Zealand history, or if they did, it was the kind of mythical version, you know, best race relations in the world, Pākehā, patting themselves on the back, weren't we wonderful to our natives kind of thing. So we need to move beyond that and engage with our history, warts and all, and that can be an uncomfortable process. But I think it's a very necessary one as part of a wider process of reconciliation. And I'm not talking about treaty claims process here. I'm talking about how do we live together in this nation? What do we aspire for this country looking forward? And I think having that historical awareness and understanding is critical to that, because young people will grow up with a better sense of who they are, where they've come from, and that's empowering. I don't, people sometimes think that that's divisive, but I think it's actually a really positive thing. It's great for everybody. In terms of how we get there, obviously teaching that history in the schools is really critical. And I mean, there are other practical things as well. One that I often talk about is we need to protect the sites, because, how do we mark power sites in this country? Often we run roads through the middle of them. And, we need to be better at looking after and protecting our heritage, because that's our connection with that history. And you know, we know the power of going to those places, that they connect us with those events in the past. And so please just look after what we've got left, because so much of it has been destroyed.
Thanks, Vincent. There is a question here for any or all of you. What advice would you give to an aspiring writer who has limited time around work, whānau, and other responsibilities? This is from Jane. Any advice for Jane?
Well, I remember when my children were young, when they were, you know, and I had no time, and, you know, having to work as well, I would get up very early in the morning and like, you know, up at 4:30 and write till 7 when I woke them and got them ready for school. You know, if you really want to write, you will write. You'll find time, whether it's, you know, in the middle of the night or early in the morning, or you are very strict with yourself and you put aside all of Saturday, all of Sunday. You know, it's discipline. In the end, that's what it comes down to. I know I sound like a school mum, but
I'd suggest writing very short poems, or if you want to write fiction, I'd try out flash fiction, which is a new genre almost. But it just means you're writing in a very coherent but very short fiction form of about anything between 100 and 300 words. And not only will that allow you to get things completed, but it will also hone your skills, because it's a very, very hard job to write a story which is, you know, ticks all the boxes in that very short compass. And it teaches you economy, and it teaches you how to start and how to finish a story, only in a very short compass. And, you know, you can dash one of those off in half an hour.
Great. You got any tips to add, Vincent?
Well, I think when you're writing something, and the others probably know this, your head's always in it. Even when you're doing other things, you're thinking about that work. And I would say carry a notebook or record thoughts that you have when you're at the supermarket or wherever, because often, you know, I've just sort of randomly thought of, oh, here's the introduction, here's the opening paragraph to my book. I need to go away. I need to find somewhere to write this down now. You know, that kind of thing. So you're always thinking about it, even when you're not actually doing it, I think.
You have a notebook beside your bed too, because often, isn't it strange, just as you're going to sleep, sometimes the bolt will hit you. Oh, that's the answer. And of course, you think to yourself, oh, I'll remember that, but you may not.
There's another, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. There's another one which is addressed to all. What's the single biggest change to life as a writer that you've experienced since you began your careers?
Winning the Prime Minister's Award. It's just happened to me.
I'm into that. Yes.
Well, winning the Prime Minister's Award. I think for me, a lot changed when my big book, The Great War for New Zealand, came out in 2016, because there was a huge audience for that, and that kind of raised my profile. Prior to that, I was sort of writing away and doing reasonably well, but that sort of changed things. And, you know, I started getting invited to literary festivals and to give talks up and down the country and hundreds of schools and all that kind of stuff as well. So that was a big turning point for me.
So acknowledgement makes all the difference. Well, look, we're going to wrap up very soon. I've got a question, another sort of final question I wanted to ask of all of you, really. You've all been professional writers for a long time. You all continue to create work that's fresh and relevant, exciting to read. And I'm just wondering, what keeps the job of writing exciting for you? And what makes you look forward to your work?
Some days it's very hard, you know, you're not exactly looking forward to it. No, often I think with novels, anyway, there's often a sort of middle zone where you know, in that first draft where you're pushing the story through, and I mean, you can always, you know, you're going to go back over it and over it and over it and over it and over it, of course, in subsequent drafts. But I think, you know, you sort of, writing fiction, at least you'll have, you get up, you leave your desk and you're leaving your characters kind of frozen. So, you know, you're wanting to get back to the next day to sort of animate them again and move it on and see where it's going to go.
I think for me, it's the thrill of a job well done when you finish it. If you really think that does what I wanted it to do, and well, it's accomplishment, achievement. I think, you know, all creative people do it. You know, a potter will make a wonderful bowl, or a turner will make a lovely chair, or something like that. It's the same with writing to me. But I just can't do it otherwise. It's what I love and what I love doing. I've been very fortunate that I've very rarely had writer's block, and if I do, it's either because I suddenly realise that what I'm doing is not really very good at all and can it, or because I wear a number of writing hats, I can always shift. I can put it to one side and go and work on a children's book or something like that.
I think a big part of it for me as a historian is the research side of things, because you're never quite sure what you're going to dig up that's new. I remember years ago at Archives New Zealand, I found a file that proved definitively that the government had lied about the date of an ultimatum to the Waikato tribes. It was supposed to give them an opportunity to comply before the Crown invaded. That was a sham ultimatum. And, you know, those moments are few and far between, but you're always kind of, you know, it's a bit of a, there's a bit of detective work in this, and you're never quite sure what you're going to turn up that's new and exciting. And of course you want to share that. I mean, the other aspect of that as well, as I said, is like I'm really passionate about the need for New Zealanders to engage with our history, to acknowledge our history. And I mean, writing isn't the only way to have those conversations, but it's an important part of it as well, I think.
Absolutely.
Well, look, we're coming to the end of our session. As a reader, as a New Zealander, I'm looking forward greatly to whatever the three of you write next, and as I know many others do. I'd like to thank you for everything you've contributed as writers. Wish you all the best for your future projects, and thank you again for joining us this evening. I've loved hearing your readings and your incredibly generous and thoughtful and articulate answers. Thank you also to everyone, wherever you are, who have joined us this evening. Thank you very much to our signers, for Creative New Zealand for establishing and administering these awards, to Auckland Live, who looked after the technical production of all this, and I'd like to hand over now to Haniko for a closing karakia.
Tēnā tātou katoa, tēnā koe Nick, Naomi kai hau tu te pōnei, tēnā koutou nā rangatira, James, Stephanie, Vincent, koe ki koutou ki nā taumata, ko koutou nā taonga mō nā whakatipuranga eke nei. Nā reira, kia kati tō tātou hui, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapapauna me te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I tēnei pō, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou, tuturo whiti ka whakamaua kia tīnā, haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e.